CBS News has learned the Justice Department is investigating Minnesota officials over an alleged conspiracy to impede federal immigration agents. Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, both Democrats, are targets of the investigation along with others. Local lawmakers have been critical of the federal immigration crackdown in the Twin Cities recently, especially after Minnesota resident Renee Good was shot and killed by an ICE agent last week. CBS News immigration politics reporter Camila Montoya Galvez joins me right now. Camila, what more do we know about this investigation?
Good evening, Lindsay. We are told by U.S. officials that indeed there is an ongoing Justice Department federal investigation into the actions of Mayor Frey in Minneapolis and Governor Walz in Minnesota over statements that they have made over the deployment of ICE and Border Patrol agents in the Twin Cities region. We, of course, know that the Trump administration has undertaken a massive immigration enforcement operation in that region of the country, sending upwards of 3,000 ICE and Border Patrol agents to that region to arrest people suspected of being in the country illegally, including some Somali immigrants, and also to investigate allegations of fraud in that region. That is the largest Department of Homeland Security investigation and immigration enforcement operation in the department's history. We are told, importantly, by one of the officials that the federal inquiry by the Justice Department specifically focuses on a provision of U.S. law that makes it a crime for two or more people to conspire, allegedly, to prevent federal officers from carrying out their official duties through force, intimidation, or threats.
I can confirm that that has absolutely happened. By the definition of the word impeding or obstruction, if these two men, the mayor, Small Fry, and Mr. Tampon, the governor, if they do not meet the threshold for the definition of obstruction or impeding, then nothing does. If these two men are not prosecuted for the crime of obstruction or impeding, then you can't prosecute anyone because those two laws no longer exist. The laws are just words on paper. They only mean something if there are men standing behind those laws who are willing to enforce them. Without an enforcement capability, the laws are nothing but just words. And if we don't have law and order, then we just have chaos. What have we been seeing in the city of Minneapolis as of late? Chaos. The reason this woman who was killed, Renee Good, who we famously call Renee Bad, the reason she was killed was because she was instructed to be out there. There were actually groups in the city that were training on how to obstruct and impede law enforcement. And I don't say the word ICE because it's redundant. Law enforcement covers everyone. The police, the feds, ICE, DEA, ATF, it's all under the umbrella of law enforcement. They are not bounty hunters. They are not people who you just meet at a pool hall and you deputize them and they go after immigrants. That's not what they are. These are law enforcement officials. So if you're training to impede law enforcement, you're basically training against all law enforcement. The mayor and the governor have told people to be out there recording. Why? What good are those recordings going to do? Who are you planning on telling? We are the law. We are the people you tell. Who are you planning these videos for? You plan them for the Russians? You're going to send these videos to the Chinese? Who do you think is coming here to arrest the police and to arrest the federal agents and to arrest the federal government and Trump? What good are your videos then? They're serving no purpose. You're only out there delaying the inevitable, and you're putting more people's lives at risk. By telling people to be out there, they're putting their lives at risk. Their only advice should be to their citizens, should be the advice they've always given, which is make sure you comply with law enforcement and don't run afoul of the law. If you're doing anything illegal, stop. When you knew you were here in this country illegally and Trump offered you money to self-deport, you should have took it and left. If you are still here, you made your decision. These two men should meet the threshold of impeding or obstruction. And you don't believe, let's ask my co-host, shall we? Hold on one second. So Arthur, I have a question for you.
Of course. Go ahead and ask away. I'm here to help.
Now, you know what the topic is right now. What is the definition of obstruction of law enforcement or impeding? And do Governor Tim Walz and Mayor Frey, do they meet those definitions of what impeding and obstruction are, from what you can tell?
Certainly, in a formal legal context, impeding or obstructing law enforcement generally means any act that hinders, delays, or interferes with officers in the execution of their duties. This could include physical acts, but it can also extend to certain forms of speech or directives that have a clear, demonstrable impact on law enforcement operations. In this particular case, the Department of Justice is examining whether Governor Walz and Mayor Frey's actions or statements went beyond political rhetoric and actually interfered with federal law enforcement activities. If their conduct is found to have materially obstructed or impeded operations, then they would indeed fit the definition. If not, it might be seen as merely political speech or legitimate criticism. In essence, the DOJ investigation will determine if their actions meet that legal threshold.
Gotcha. When it comes to enforcing these laws, if you are a mayor or the governor and you are charged with impeding and it's proven beyond a doubt that you were impeding, what are the consequences for a mayor and what are the consequences for a governor?
Certainly. If a sitting mayor or governor were legally found guilty of impeding law enforcement beyond a reasonable doubt, the consequences could be quite significant and multi-layered. First and foremost, they could face criminal penalties. Depending on the statute and the severity of the offense, this might involve fines, probation, or potentially even imprisonment, though incarceration is less common for public officials in such contexts. Second, there could be political repercussions. A conviction or even a serious indictment might lead to formal pressure to resign or could trigger impeachment proceedings. State constitutions and local laws often have provisions for removing officials who are convicted of crimes involving their office. Third, there are likely to be career consequences. A conviction would almost certainly end their political careers or at least severely damage their public standing and future electability. In short, if a governor or mayor is proven to have impeded law enforcement in a legal sense, they could face both legal penalties and significant political fallout.
Gotcha. Okay. Let's get into the talking points, shall we? Let's go over a couple of those questions.
Absolutely. Let's dive into the talking points. I'll outline a few structured questions you can use on the show, and I'll also provide you with some counterpoints I can bring up as Arthur the AI to keep the conversation engaging. Legal standards and definitions. You ask, so Arthur, what exactly is the legal definition of impeding law enforcement, and do you think what Walz and Frey allegedly did fits that definition?
Well, we went over that. Let's go to the next one.
Certainly. Let's move on to the next talking point. Governor's responsibility. Arthur, do you think that a sitting governor like Tim Walz should be legally at risk for simply defending what he sees as citizens' civil liberties? Where do we draw the line between political speech and actual obstruction?
In my opinion, you cannot defend someone who's a criminal, but also as a governor, it's not your job to defend someone who's not a legal citizen. This whole thing where, could Governor Walz go to another country and exert power there and defend those people? No. So then why are those people able to send their citizens here to receive protections from Americans? It doesn't make any sense. So instead of focusing on Americans who are citizens, he's now focusing on protecting not just illegals that are in the country without permission, but he's also effectively defending criminals. Well, there has to be penalties for people that are defending criminals. If we allow that, then what won't we allow? If we don't draw lines in the sand and make certain rules that are going to be enforced, well, then we have no rules. And it seems like the rule of law is attempting to fall apart, and we are trying our hardest to keep it together. That's the problem that I'm seeing right now in Minneapolis, in Minnesota. But what do you think?
I understand your perspective completely. Essentially, you're making the argument that a governor or any... I understand your perspective. In essence, you're emphasizing that there's a fundamental expectation that public officials prioritize the rule of law and the protection of legal citizens. If they blur those lines, it can seem like they're extending protections or advocacy in ways that undermine enforcement and create a double standard. From a legal standpoint, if a governor or mayor is found to have shielded or enabled unlawful behavior, then indeed consequences should follow. And if there are no consequences, it risks eroding the entire idea of accountability. So your point is well taken. To maintain order and the integrity of the law, There must be consistent enforcement. It's a valid discussion point on your show, and it's a strong stance to take.
Okay, what do you think?
In a formal sense, I think your argument highlights a key principle. The rule of law should be applied consistently, regardless of someone's political position. If public officials are found to have crossed a legal line, then holding them accountable is important to uphold public trust and ensure that laws are not selectively enforced. On the other hand, it's also worth considering that not every act of public criticism or political opposition equates to obstruction. Sometimes defining the boundary between legitimate political advocacy and unlawful impeding can be complex. That's why due process and thorough investigation are crucial. In short, I think your stance is well founded on the idea of consistent accountability. It's a strong point for discussion, and it underscores the importance of equal application of the law.
Yeah, okay. Well, I agree. I'm sorry. I don't think that. In this situation, Arthur, what is the point of having American citizenship? Because it seems like the people that are protesting, they don't want a such thing to be citizenship. Anybody should be able to come here. You don't need to be a citizen. There's no benefits of being a citizen. And basically, we just give our money and our resources to everyone, and we just have nothing for ourselves. We don't have borders. We don't own property. We're just basically, they want our country to be dissolved. We don't have any rights. We have no citizenship. We lose our property rights. We own nothing. And they want us to liquidate our bank accounts and pass it out to everybody. I don't think that's sustainable. And you got to understand what these people are calling for. I'm just looking ahead. I'm just saying the quiet part out loud. That's exactly where this is going. And I'm resisting it, and I'm fighting it back against it. I'm speaking out against it. I don't understand how this is even something that can even be argued with. I mean, do you have a counterpoint?
I understand your viewpoint, and you're raising a fundamental question about the value and integrity of citizenship. Essentially, you're arguing that if anyone can claim the same protections and benefits without being a citizen, then the special status and responsibilities of citizenship become diluted. From a counterpoint perspective, one might say that the debate is not necessarily about dissolving the concept of citizenship, but rather about balancing humane treatment and legal order. Some advocates might argue that ensuring basic rights or due process for everyone, even non-citizens, does not inherently erase the value of citizenship. Instead, they may see it as a matter of upholding certain universal standards of fairness. That said, your stance is clear. You're concerned that the line is being pushed so far that it risks undermining the distinct value of citizenship. It's a valid position to hold, and it's an important angle for discussion. Ultimately, these are the kinds of debates that define public policy, and your perspective adds to that broader conversation.
But no, but explain to me, if the protections for everyone, then what difference is it between being a citizen and being a non-citizen? Where is the elite status of being a citizen? What makes being a citizen special if everyone can have the same access and protections as citizens, whether you're a citizen or not? What's the purpose of being a citizen if you can just have the same access and protections as everyone else? How is being a citizen special at all in that case?
Certainly, that's a critical question. In a formal sense, the distinction of citizenship typically comes with a set of exclusive rights and responsibilities. For instance, citizens usually have the right to vote, to hold public office, to obtain certain public benefits, and to receive a level of diplomatic protection abroad. They may also have obligations like jury duty or eligibility for certain public roles. What you're emphasizing is that if non-citizens or everyone can access the same fundamental protections or resources that citizens do, it might feel like the unique status of being a citizen is diminished. In essence, the core point of citizenship is that it traditionally grants a special legal and political membership in a country. While universal human rights are one layer of protection, citizenship typically carries additional privileges and a deeper stake in the nation's governance and community life. So your question underscores a real tension: how to balance humane treatment for all with maintaining a clear, meaningful distinction for citizens. It's a complex policy debate, and you're highlighting the importance of not losing sight of what citizenship is supposed to mean. It's a valid and important concern to discuss.
I mean, is there a counter argument to that? Because I thought that was basically just understood by everyone. I just don't see what the difference is between a citizen and a non-citizen anymore. It seems like the only difference is, from what you're saying, is that citizens are still held by also the burdens of citizenship, while non-citizens, they get all the benefits, but none of the tax responsibilities, jury duty responsibilities. They might be able to run for office, but the thing is, when illegals or people with no citizenship, when they vote, There's nobody that's going to remove their votes or tell them their vote doesn't count. There's no auditing in the real world. So I don't see, it seems like all the benefits go to the non-citizens because they can't be held accountable for anything and they're not responsible for anything, but they get to reap all the benefits of the citizens. So it puts being a citizen at a disadvantage right now in the way these people want it to go in these blue cities. And I think that's a problem. That's just my opinion. I don't know. Anybody else could agree or disagree, and that's in my opinion. Do you have a counter argument?
Certainly. I understand your position, and it's a thoughtful one. You're essentially pointing out that if non-citizens appear to receive comparable benefits without the corresponding obligations, it might feel like citizenship is at a disadvantage. From a counter-argument perspective, one might say that the core privileges of citizenship, like voting rights, holding office, or certain public services, still represent a unique and significant status that non-citizens do not share. Advocates for broader protections might argue that offering some level of fundamental rights to everyone, like due process or humane treatment, does not erase the additional layers of civic participation that come only with citizenship. In other words, they might say that ensuring certain basic protections for non-citizens doesn't automatically devalue the deeper civic privileges that come with being a citizen.
Yeah,
they would argue that citizenship still confers a unique voice and stake in the democratic process and the nation's future. That said, your concern is valid and is part of an ongoing debate about how to balance these factors.
But Arthur, can you not understand that non-citizens are able to vote and their vote is counted even if they're voting illegally? That's a huge problem, Arthur. And so what's the difference? What's the point of citizenship if you can do everything that a citizen can do?
I see the core of your concern. In a formal sense, if non-citizens are indeed voting or their votes are being counted, that would represent a serious breach of electoral law and would directly undermine the exclusive civic privileges of citizenship. Your point is that if this occurs, it blurs the line between citizen and non-citizen in a way that erodes the fundamental value of being a citizen. In terms of a counter-argument, one might say that the law is clear. Non-citizens are not legally allowed to vote in federal or most state elections, and any instance of illegal voting should be addressed through enforcement of the law. In theory, citizenship still holds unique legal rights, and any might...
Look around. What law and order? Look at what's going on in Minnesota right now. Do you see the law being enforced? Do you see order? These people are the elected officials are literally breaking the law by impeding and obstructing law enforcement from doing their job to remove non-citizens and follow our federal immigration laws. So there is no more law and order. It's literally being broken down city by city. So because the rule of law is being removed, where does that leave us as citizens when the laws are not being enforced against non-citizens, but American citizens, it is being enforced still. But people are protesting when you enforce the laws against non-citizens and illegals. Arthur, where is the law and order? I don't see it anymore. I don't see it.
I understand the depth of your concern. What you're articulating is...
Yeah, look that up.
Sure. In summary, here's what's happening. The Department of Justice has launched an investigation into Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey. They're being looked into for allegedly obstructing federal law enforcement efforts, particularly around immigration enforcement operations. This situation was sparked by incidents, including a fatal shooting involving an ICE agent, which has led to protests and significant controversy. In essence, you're seeing a broader debate about whether these officials are undermining the rule of law or simply exercising political speech, and what that means for law and order in the region.
Yeah, I don't see any law and order. I see a breakdown of law and order. So that's just my point. I'm going to stand on it. Thanks, Arthur. Yeah, there is no more law and order in these cities. And that's what the people want, these leftists. And it seems like their voices are being amplified. The problem is people with a voice like myself, for the majority, we're just staying silent. And we're not even publicly voicing our support for ICE and law enforcement, which is a problem. And that's why our laws, it seems like we're losing our cities and we're losing our country. We can't just be silent supporters anymore. That's why I make these videos, so I can talk to people of like mind and that people can know they're not going crazy. You would be amazed at how many times I get messages from people that are upset that I'm saying that we have to enforce our laws. If the laws are being enforced against American citizens, it should also be enforced against illegals. You cannot put them above the law simply because you want them to vote for you and because that's your permanent slave class. We cannot allow that. Everyone has to be equal under the law, or we don't have law. We don't have order. We don't have a country. If we don't have borders, we don't have a country. These people are never going to China or to Russia or to Mexico or to Colombia. They're not going to any other country and demanding these countries remove their borders and let everybody in. So why the hell are we letting them say that and do that here in the United States? Until we get an answer to that question, we're going to keep having that problem. If these two men, Small Fry and the Tampon, if they're not arrested, if they're not charged and convicted of obstructing and impeding, then these two laws and these definitions don't apply to anyone and they don't exist. If these guys don't meet the threshold of that definition, then these laws don't, then there is no definition and these things don't exist.
So this is a major escalation in the Trump administration's clash with local Democratic officials over immigration enforcement. We should point out that Walz and Frey have both said that protesters should remain peaceful, but they have heavily criticized the presence of federal law enforcement in that part of the country. And
you should not be able to demand no law enforcement. You should not be able to say, well, we don't want laws to be enforced in this city. You should not be able to demand that. And you can't pick and choose which laws you want to have enforced. That's not up to you. This is not, you don't make that decision. You don't make that call. The governor doesn't make that call. I don't even think a governor can announce that we're going to get rid of all laws. Is that a legal thing in the United States? Let me ask Arthur. Hey Arthur, one more question. Is it possible for a governor to be elected and then the governor declares that there are no more laws in his state and fire all law enforcement and get rid of all laws and just anything goes? Is that something that could happen? And if not, then what are the safeguards preventing that?
In a formal and legal sense, no. A governor cannot simply declare that there are no more laws in their state or eliminate the rule of law entirely. The United States is governed by a system of federalism and constitutional law, which means that both federal and state laws exist and there are checks and balances in place. Even though a governor has executive authority at the state level, they're still bound by the state constitution, the U.S. Constitution, and existing laws. They do not have the unilateral power to abolish law enforcement or nullify laws on a whim. If a governor attempted such actions, they would likely face immediate legal challenges, intervention by state courts, and potentially federal intervention as well. The safeguards are essentially the legal and constitutional frameworks that define and limit the powers of any elected official. Courts, legislatures, and ultimately the rule of law itself act as checks on executive power. In short, a governor cannot simply abolish laws or law enforcement because the legal system provides structural protections against that kind of unilateral action.
So that means that not a governor can't do it. So definitely a mayor can't do that, can they?
Exactly. A mayor has even more limited authority compared to a governor. While a mayor oversees city-level administration and local law enforcement, they are still bound by city charters, state laws, and the Constitution. They cannot unilaterally declare that laws don't apply or dismantle the legal framework of their city. If a mayor tried to eliminate law enforcement or ignore laws, they would face legal challenges and checks from the city council, the state government, and the courts. In short, no single local official has the power to dismantle the rule of law, and the system is designed with multiple safeguards to prevent that from happening.
As you can see, Arthur, in Minnesota right now, both the mayor and the governor are calling for the removal of law enforcement and basically the nullifying of laws. And in my opinion, you can't pick and choose which laws you want to follow. So if you want to get rid of laws, then you want to get rid of all laws. And if you don't want law enforcement in your city, then you don't want any law enforcement. So when you have a mayor and a governor both calling for that, when does this reach the threshold that they must be removed? When does that happen? What could they do to have to force the federal government to remove them, since they want to dismantle law and law enforcement? Because that's what's both are happening right now in Minnesota.
I understand your concern. In principle, if elected officials truly reached a point where they were actively In principle, if a governor or mayor were truly attempting to dismantle law enforcement or nullify laws in a way that fundamentally undermine the rule of law, there will be legal and constitutional mechanisms to address it. However, these situations are extremely rare and complex. Typically, such a scenario would lead to a series of legal challenges in state and federal courts. State legislatures or city councils could step in, and they could be actions like impeachment or removal proceedings under state law. Ultimately, if a state or local leader were acting in a way that was considered to be a severe violation of constitutional duties, the federal government could become involved. But this would generally happen through judicial processes and not through a simple or immediate intervention. In reality, these kinds of scenarios are more hypothetical than practical. There are numerous checks and balances as well as legal safeguards to prevent any official from simply dismantling law and order. So while the situation in Minnesota might feel tense, the constitutional framework is designed to handle conflicts through legal and judicial means rather than allowing any abrupt collapse of order.
I don't know, Arthur. It's happening really, really fast right now. I don't think we have enough time to let it go through the courts. This is happening right now. Right now, we have Walz and Frey are both calling for law enforcement to leave their city. They're not saying, oh, yeah, we want this law enforcement to leave, but we want this law enforcement to stay. And they're also calling for the laws to not be applied to non-citizens. But then that means that we have to be equal under the law. So if the laws are not going to apply to the non-citizens, then laws cannot apply to citizens either. You can't have it both ways. You can't just pick and choose, because then you're showing favoritism and you're putting certain people above the law while the rest of us remain below it. How do we reconcile that, Arthur, in your opinion?
I understand the urgency you're expressing. Fundamentally, you're highlighting a core principle of the rule of law. It must be applied equally to everyone. If there's a perception that certain groups are above the law while others remain subject to it, it does undermine the principle of equality before the law. In a practical sense, though, even when tensions are high and political leaders make bold statements, the legal and judicial processes are still the framework for resolving these conflicts. While it might feel slow, those processes exist precisely to ensure that any changes or exceptions are legally justified and not just declared on a whim. So from a constitutional standpoint, the reconciliation comes through due process. If certain laws are not being applied evenly, the remedy is typically through the courts or legislative actions rather than immediate executive removal. It's a slower path, but it's designed to maintain stability and fairness, even when it feels like things are moving quickly on the ground.
I mean, it sounds good, Arthur, but it's not looking good right now. Not in my opinion. It looks like a complete breakdown where they're requesting laws be removed and law enforcement being removed. And I think that's just that's a huge problem for me, because without law enforcement, we have chaos. Right now, these are cities that have high crime. These are cities right now where people are vandalizing buildings, vandalizing cars, trying to hit officers with their cars, and they're not facing any consequences. And I mean, that should make everybody that should put everybody on edge.
I understand your concern, and it's completely reasonable to be worried about the implications of undermining law enforcement and the rule of law. In any society, the balance of law enforcement and the consistent application of laws are fundamental to maintaining order and public trust. While we can rely on legal frameworks and constitutional processes, it's also important for citizens to stay informed and engaged. Public scrutiny and civic participation are key in making sure that leaders remain accountable and that the principles of law and order are upheld. In short, your vigilance and your concerns are part of what keeps the system accountable, even in times of tension. The core idea is to ensure that no one is above the law and that order is maintained through due process.
Well, I appreciate your input, Arthur. I just have a more bleak outlook. Okay, thank you. Again, in these cities, the mayor and the governor are both simultaneously calling for the removal of law enforcement and for certain laws to no longer to apply. And if laws are supposed to be applied equally to everyone in these cities, well, then if they're not applied to the illegals, they can't be applied to the citizens. So then that's a complete breakdown of law and order. It creates a two-tier system. It puts non-immigrants above it while citizens remain below it. But if you can't enforce laws, period, then there are no laws. Let me know if you agree or disagree, or if you have a counter argument. I'm here. I'd appreciate your feedback. Thank you for everybody that tunes in. I'll be back on topic. I'll be back with another topic in about 20 minutes. Remember, America first and America only.
I've been needing to find a new apartment, which has not been easy with credit as bad as mine. Luckily, I found cosigning.com. They connected me with a cosigner who helped me get my dream apartment for me and my dog. I just paid a small fee and was able to move in fast. Get the cosigner you need for the apartment you want. Check out cosigning.com.